Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Coroner. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, this is a very complicated case, an interesting and kind of different case, where we basically have the wife and the daughter at odds because Olivia's the stepmother and she's not always been on the best of terms with her stepdaughter Lilium, where it's like basically both of them, I think it comes down from like having two different opinions about how to handle the whole thing about her husband, Lilium's dad, Xavier, who's basically a well-known, neurobiologist or something like that, but basically he's kind of locked within himself because of a stroke he had the year prior, and so he can only speak like through a machine. And so basically she's from a belief of basically cryo freezing him because, someone that, because once again, I always heard it was a rumor. I don't know how true it is. I always thought when there are talks that they did that to Walt Disney or at least to his head or something like that. Is that like a rumor? I've never actually looked into it, but I always remember hearing that perpetuated when I was younger. I never actually have ever looked into whether or not that's just like BS or not. But essentially, it's people who wanting to freeze themselves, hoping that when the future, it's like someone who might have like an incurable disease. It's like, right, the cure doesn't exist now, but get them frozen in the future, and then maybe that, by then, the cure will be able. So that's where Olivia is coming from. She's coming from the perspective of I want to freeze my husband because that way death is no longer a thing. His mind is too beautiful and too amazing to let it go to waste. For her, it's she even describes it later on this world is barbaric. That the fact is one of our greatest minds could just disappear like that. And it's she doesn't want that. She wants to believe in the future. But to anyone else, it sounds crazy because she references later on. It's you think the impossible is impossible until it's proven possible. It's what about the Wright brothers? They proved that flight was possible, or then harnessing nuclear energy type of situation. So it's everything seems crazy until it's proven. It's well, I was about to make another example, but I'm that's already quote unquote a controversial thing to it. I was about to say the Earth. I was about to say yeah, people believe the Earth to be flat and it turns out spherical, but then it's well, that's up to debate now. Not full debate, but there are people who believe in the flat Earth theory, but also it's once again, it's people believe Earth to be this that the sun revolved around Earth when it's the other way around, because people thought Earth was kind of the center of the universe, and that's a whole thing. So it is just a thing of right, you are crazy until you're proven not crazy. I was watching something else where they referenced that, where it was yeah, someone was considered crazy until 20 years later it was oh yeah, that person who talked about germs and stuff like that, they were totally right, but they were ridiculed and even eventually died in an asylum because, so it's something of that nature is kind of her point. It seems a little weird and crazy, but it comes from a good place of I wanting to preserve my husband. But the problem is Lilium is no, I had this conversation with my dad. Here it is. He was not all about this. The fact is that they're saying my dad died at 7. I got here at 8. Things seem fishy because she's they definitely killed my dad. Olivia murdered my dad by pulling him off the plug. But it's when they are starting to investigate everything, initially there are some inconsistencies because it's because even Lilium was well, that dude over there, you're not the normal night nurse. Where's the other dude? And it's so why are you lying to us? We end up finding out that the cryo company or whatever, that quote unquote night nurse, he actually works for them. So it's and there's also there's a heart monitor connected to him, so they're hoping to see maybe it'll give them some idea of whether it was something of natural causes or but it was ultimately inconclusive. So Jenny even because Olivia brought her lawyer into this because his body needs to be put on ice properly preserved and everything, or it can't be preserved at all. So it is kind of they're on a clock for Olivia, but Jenny can't do her autopsy and find out what's going on until she gets a judge to sign off on it, because it's yeah, there have been inconsistencies in the case and I won't be able to determine whether or not there is foul play here until she does the autopsy. So and ultimately they do, but there's no conclusive enough to be right, there's nothing, it's it could have been oh, they pull disconnect him from the heart monitor and then injecting him or did whatever they did to him, but whatever it is, it's inconclusive to determine what actually happened. It's actually interesting. Dennis is actually a part of this case. It doesn't come up, but I'm curious like how things went between Dennis and River when they went on their date. I hope things. I mean, it didn't seem like anything awkward. Once again, like that depends on whether there was anything cut from this episode, because now I'm paranoid about that. I mean, it's a possibility, just for the sake of like it going from airing in Canada to it airing here in the U.S. on the CW. They might have cut stuff down for time for like to compensate for like commercials and stuff like that. Because I mean, maybe commercials work a little differently in Canada. Maybe like because I don't know what their television system's like set up like. I'd assume like regular TV there has commercials. I'm like, because I'm starting to wonder like, do like British shows have commercials? I'd assume so, because like I watch stuff on BBC America, but I don't know if that's like a 1-for-1. I don't think it is. You never know. I don't know. So that just, regardless, tangents and all that aside, but I'm like, yeah, at least from what I saw in the episode on the CW app, it's like there was no like, like anything between that. So I was like, maybe things were good. So things didn't seem awkward between them, but regardless, I just thought that was kind of neat. In actuality, Donovan and Jenny actually go visit the place, and it is a little rinky-dink, and you're like, oh, the guy who's running is like, oh, sorry, like my lunch is here. He just like hasn't like it looks like it legitimately doesn't look like a corporation of the future of like, yeah, we're like, it didn't seem like the big most high-tech building, and even to the point, because it turns out like, oh, to preserve your body is like $265,000, and just even Jenny's mouthing the words to Donovan like, oh my god, like wow, and even just preserving the head is like 120,000 or something like that, and even because it was like saying something he said, the Dr. Yates or whatever, Dr. Ned said it in like a technological, like a very technical way, and Donovan's like, are you saying? Jenny's like, yeah, they're talking about just slicing off your head and preserving that. It's like, okay. But then like while they're there, it's like, yeah, we got to get the body, it's like, yeah, because if the body's not given us in time, it's no use to us. And it's like, wait, no use to you? It's like that made it sound like, right, you're not, you're trying to make it seem like, you're trying to help people, but it's like, no, you're trying to like, it's on that, I think it borderlines on that fringe science thing, but also it's just like, this guy just seemed like a fringe scientist. And even then, like, the power started dimming out, he's like, must have been a black. I'm like, why are you so casual about that? Your entire, like, operation runs on electricity. Like, I don't know whether it's like they have backup generators, but it feels like you wouldn't be in an area that would just let that happen. That shouldn't even be like, you should have been freaking out, like, oh my god, like, we got to make sure that, it's like, you're so nonchalant about, even with backup generators, you don't, I mean, that conversation didn't come up, at least within the confines of the episode that I'm aware of, but it's like, he just seemed too nonchalant about that. I'm like, your whole thing runs off electricity, like, if these things go off for too long, I mean, I get it, these people's bodies are frozen, but it's like, if those degrees ever deviate from where they're at, because he was like, it's 100 and something, was it minus 190 Celsius or something like that to keep these bodies in that stasis, and it's like, if it raises like a certain degree, like, wouldn't that kind of like defeat the purpose? Like, even like raising a couple degrees could end up like ruining everything. So that's why I'm like, wouldn't that freak you out a little bit more? Because even Jenny left her being like, this operation is janky as hell. It's supposed to be like this high-tech operation, but even like Donovan's like, are they like so like in need of money that are they assisting with this, or are they straight up killing their people? Because Donovan ends up sitting down with Olivia, and she shows him this projection, because she's like, yeah, this is something she had planned for a movie, but she could never get it made. And it's like, this is something like from 40 years ago. It's all the like stuff like face recognition and stuff like that. Like a lot of stuff that is just commonplace now. Because she even said it, it's like, once you get so used to something, like, it's like, you kind of go like, oh yeah, like, you can barely remember life without it. I mean, like, just even my lifetime alone, it's like, can you remember dial-up? Like, to me, that's crazy. I had dial-up until high school. Like, granted, at that time, we could have had, like, higher internet, but, like, I never, like, pushed my family to get faster internet, and it was, like, night and day. Now, I remember vividly when we got it, because I started watching anime. I was able to stream anime again because I couldn't, because I used to have to wait 5 hours for it to, like, buffer while I was at school, and hope that the internet didn't disconnect, because it disconnected after 5 hours. I'm going to go a whole tangent. I think I've had this discussion before, but I used to have to watch anime like that, and it seems like a thing of the past. Like, dial-up, it seems so antiquated. By the time I was in high school, it was already antiquated, but it's just like, like, that's the thing of just kind of like, yeah, you kind of take things for revenge, because, like, you're like, right, you get so used to, like, internet. Like, I've had internet for, like, I didn't really start utilizing the internet to its full extent until like I got in high school, but it was around when I was in middle school. But it's just like, yeah, like you're so used to it, you can't even like, oh, it almost feels like it's been with us the entire time, when in actuality the internet is not as old as you would think it is, you know? So it's kind of along those conversation lines, and it was just like about like some of the technology of just like, right, we just have it, we just kind of take it for granted as like, yeah, like, oh, it's always been there. It's like, no, it hasn't. It's such new technology, stuff like that. So because she was trying to tell him of like, right, like all this stuff here, like these were like dreams of mine, and now look at them, they were like actual technology, they exist. Like for her, that's what this thing is. Like, yeah, she doesn't care about the business, but the science itself is what she believes in. She believes in a place where they don't have to fear about death. And even Donovan's like, yeah, a place like that, but he just doesn't believe it. But I think seeing all of it in his current circumstance, you can tell like the wonder in his eyes of almost amazement, or just like, wow, like it did open his eyes and present things from a different perspective. But ultimately, we find out there's a complication to this case, because Malik is talking to the lady who ended up making the device for Xavier to speak through. Basically, like, it records like conversation, and it's adaptive to kind of keep, like, it kind of, we find out later on, because Malik ended up discovering, because Jenny, during their autopsy, like, right, the wife wants the brain. It's like, right, we need it to find out what happens, but right, we're running out of time. But the moment they cut his head open, his brain is mush. Because it's like, no, like, he'd have to have been dead at least 48 hours for this. So it's like, but they've been talking to him, so it's like, right, the machine, because at first I was like, oh, did someone tamper with it and make it seem like was someone lying to someone else? It's like, no, they were both being lied to, because she had created the machine to, like, basically, like, he was always caught in the middle between his daughter and his wife, and so it was taking a lot on him. So like this technician, she developed it so that it would respond to certain key phrases like, oh, daddy, darling, my love. So, and then like take like the patterns of how, like, it was almost like copying his consciousness to a certain extent, almost like in an AI sense, but the technology isn't fully there yet. It's still in that like beginning infancy phase. And so it was like, so when Lilium talked to him, she was actually responding to the robot. When she when Olivia talked to him, she was responding, like, the robot was like, he was already dead by then. So like when Lilium was like, okay, Dad, it's because it's designed to appease both of them, like say what Xavier would say to appease both of them, you know, so that he could rest. So he's been dead for 48 hours and neither one of them knew it. And it's like, no, that's impossible. And just even Lillian being like, wait, so I wasn't talking to my daddy, and then it, like, the moment she's daddy, it activates, and it's just like heartbreaking, because it's like what she thought is like, at least I was talking to my dad at least a little bit, but I was talking to a machine, I didn't even know it. And it hits Olivia the hardest because, you know, which isn't, you know, trying to compare grief, but her circumstances are a little different for Lillian. It's because it's like, she thought, like, she overheard the conversation and she thought, like, oh, like, he's just trying to ease her heart, like, this is what he wants. And because she really believed that this was what he wanted, she set everything up and immediately called, like, Dr. Ned, and to kind of set the whole thing up, because obviously, like, the whole operation was kind of shady, because he was immediately like, oh, the moment Lilium showed up, we quietly left. It's like, if you were quiet, why would you quietly leave if you're not doing anything wrong? Because they're like, no, we don't show up pre-death, we show up after. It's like bull hockey. And so Dr. Ned's the one that pushed her, like, no, we got to get on top of it, got to get it, do this now. Like, granted, it's like, because even Donovan was saying it, it's like, this whole place is about taking your money. Like, it's not trying to call you full-heartedly for believing in this, but it's like, this place, like, yeah, the science is amazing, but it's also like, it is taking advantage of you being in a state of wanting to keep the person that you love around. So no one can fault you for that. And it's like, but this group is kind of taking advantage of not only you, but a lot of people. And ultimately, it turns out, like, she pulled the plug on her husband because she thought this is what he wanted. And then, like, you know, Jenny and Donovan leaves, and even Donovan's like, right, I hope I was wrong about the future. And then she's like, no, you got to arrest me. I told you I murdered my husband. It's like, no, you didn't. Your husband was already dead by then, you know? So, you know, that's the sad truth. And just, she's breaking down because of what she did. And Olivia comes over, and they hug each other. I was like, sadly, I think this will bring them closer together, sadly. But it's like, yeah, like, you know, because I think at the end of the day, despite their differences, like Lillian realizes, like, right, you loved my dad. You were just trying to do what was best for him. You were trying to keep him around as long as possible, and I can't fault you for that. Like, you know, we both thought we were doing what was right by my dad, and it's like we were both kind of fooled by this like technology that was meant to help him. Kind of, you know, the fact is he'd actually been long dead. You know, so that was actually sad. They do eventually arrest Ned for like all his involvement in all of this and kind of like manipulating people into doing all of this. So, and we do see at the end there's a severed head of like, right, got to put that on stasis and stuff like that. So what happens to his entire operation? But at the end of it all, Jenny's kind of like, right, you know, she's like, what did you mean about telling Olivia about, right, you're wrong about the future? And he's like, yeah, she showed me some things. And she's like, oh, what, do you want to get frozen now? He's like, and she's like, oh. And he opens up about the fact that he's like, yeah, I have cancer. Well, had cancer, and I had treatment, and it went away, but now I've got a hole in my spine. And like, you know, Jenny's like, oh my God, Donovan. You know, and so being, you know, luckily having a doctor friend, it's like, all right, looking through everything, it's like, all right, this seems legit. That dude, your doctor, he seems like a really good doctor. So like, I trust that like he will be able to do it. And so it is a conversation that they have of like, you know, it's like, you know, I like that in this moment, though, they open up to each other. He opens up to about this, and Jenny opens up about her love life. It's like, right. So Liam, like, really quickly, like, Liam's like, hey, like, we can kind of fit, like, he's like, you were right. I was running away from things because he thought, like, right, I couldn't get better here. But it's also like, I was only saying that because I was scared that, like, if I did stay here, that I just kind of repeat the cycle and that, you know, we'd be back where we started, which is obviously a concern for Jenny. But it's like, right, she just came back from being with Clark, and now it's like, Liam's kind of like, oh, let's give this another shot. And it's like, wait, you know, and even she's scared because, like, later on he's like, oh, here's a plot of land I bought, and it's like, we could, like, build a life here. She's like, yeah, but what if we fall through that cycle again? And like, yeah, what if we do actually give this a try and we end up right? But he's like, yeah, but it's going to be different this time. And it's like, there are no guarantees in anything. And, you know, obviously things between Clark, it's like, yeah, it's nothing official. Like, they haven't even gone on an official date. He was there to help her kind of through, like, you know, it's like that room to break stuff last episode, and they kind of did their thing. But it's also like, you know, he's waiting for an answer about that. And the moment, like, he was like, oh, I can wait. And then later on, Liam was like, I can wait. And I was like, I literally bust out laughing. I was like, that's amazing. Like, you know, because you could tell Jenny's almost pausing when she hears that too. It's like, oh God, this is happening. It's like, wow. And so, like, she's telling Donovan this later on. He's laughing. She's like, it's not funny. It's like, oh, it's like, yeah, but what about, are things even serious, Clark? She's like, no, but it's different. You know, and now it's just kind of like, she's like, oh, I could, you know, maybe I could have them both, you know, but it's like, no, she knows at the end of the day, she's going to have to make a choice. And, you know, it's just like, in that moment, she's like, yeah, just wish I could be someone else for a minute. And even Donovan's like, yeah, like, if only we could all just kind of be someone else for a minute. But in that moment, she's like, all right, let me check your spine. I am a doctor after all. And obviously because of the surgery, because the tumor did shrink, it shouldn't be painful to him. So the fact is that he's feeling pain, it's because his spine is in a fragile state because of everything, because of the cancer and everything. So it's like, she's like, as your friend, I want to tell you, do whatever, you know, makes you happy. But if you, as a doctor, if you don't get this surgery, your spine will collapse. So I'm telling you to get the surgery. And he's like, he already knew, and he's like, I am going to book it. But he's like, I already knew. It's just, there was some part of him. He's like, yeah, I guess I was just hoping out for a miracle, because the sad thing is, and he even says, like, there's a high risk I might lose the use of my legs. So of course that's going to make you start thinking about like alternatives like that. You know, something kind of fell into your lap like this. Granted, it's an expensive amount of money, but also like that said operation, this particular one is like janky as hell. But you know, the science is still there, so that's a whole conversation within itself. But so there's that. Another part of this episode is Jenny's dad seeing Peggy, and she's at the window and everything, and he starts panicking, and I'm like, oh, you're actually running from her now. Like, before he kind of embraced it, and at first I was like, oh, you're going to go see, but it's like, no. It's gotten to the point, like, at first he was like, yeah, it was fun, but now I think it's scary, because I think now he knows, like, once again, maybe it's something that was in the other episodes, or maybe it's something that happened in between episodes, but, like, he now knows she's not real, and for him, it's like, if I'm seeing her, if I actually look at her, I'm actually going to make things worse, because that means things are getting worse, because it's like, he's trying to distinguish between what's real and what isn't, and obviously diving deeper into something like this is just going to worsens it things, so like he doesn't want that to happen. And you know, Ross is there for him, and he's even appreciative because he's like, what can I do for you? And he's appreciative that Ross is like just saying that. It's like, right, rather than just treating me as like some crazy old man, you're just kind of like listening to me. So it's like, right, you go rest. And I'm curious, has Ross been working on this for a while? Which, side note, he meets up with that dude from a couple episodes ago. It's like, oh, is like Mateo like super chill about you? He's like, yeah, super chill. I'm like, is that actually the case, or does Mateo actually have no idea that you're doing that? But it's like, right, he needed someone to drive him there. So, because he also can't ask his mom to take him there. It's like, the moment he goes to a flower shop, I didn't pay as much attention. I'm like, is that where? And it's like, yeah, that's where Peggy works. And, the moment Ross, like, yeah, it's like, oh yeah, like, hi, I want to get flowers for my boyfriend. And it's like, I guess maybe he said something in that moment. He said something in that moment that got her attention because it's like, it sounded familiar. But then the moment she looked at him, like, either she'd already knew what Ross looked like, or like maybe she looked at Ross and saw his grandfather, and she was almost kind of like, oh, yeah. And he's like, you're Peggy, right? He's like, I'm Ross. And she's like, I've been wanting to meet you for a long time. So he does show up later on with the flowers and gives it's like, oh yeah, they just from grandma. And she's like, oh, she started thinking like, his grandma, like his dad's mom. But it's like, oh no, from your mom, I met her. And it's like, wait, what? Because I guess she must live somewhat in the area. Like, that's why I was wondering, like, has Ross been secretly like looking into her the entire time? Or did he just start doing that because of what, his grandfather was saying, because he was like, oh, I miss her so much and stuff like that, obviously. So he wants to look at her like the version he was seeing everywhere. It's like, right, I want to go see her because I love her and I miss her. And so maybe Ross thought like, maybe it's to everyone's benefit to have her back in their life. I mean, maybe it's also because, like, right, that's a part of himself. Maybe recent events has kind of got him thinking about, understanding all sides of himself. And it's like, here's a missing chapter in who he is because he doesn't know his mom. He doesn't know his mom's mom. But also it's like, well, Jenny's kind of got some abandonment issues related to that. So now that it's like, wait, Ross, you met with her. Like, you see it kind of like, it freezes Jenny at the end there, like, so it's already enough that like her personal love life is, because I love that it's like, oh yeah, like her and Donovan's like, oh, it's a complete opposite, because she's like, oh, I'm trying to figure things out on my front, where it's like between him and Karima, it's like, oh yeah, things are good. And she's like, yeah, completely opposite. So she's got a complicated love life, and then on top of that, she's got her mom in her life, or at least in her son's life. So that's a whole can of worms that's definitely going to be interesting to see where that goes. I'm curious to see, because there's only 2 episodes left of this season, so I'm interested to see what plays out in the next episode. I'm assuming we're trying to tackle Donovan's situation of, like, maybe that gets tackled this episode, maybe it gets tackled in the season finale, but this is all going to be interesting to see. Also, where Jenny's heart lies with the Liam situation, the Clark situation, maybe neither. We'll have to wait and see. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.